You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Jasmine, one of the things I'm probably most proud about from our year in 2019 was the hard work that you and I, maybe to a lesser extent, into organizing and bringing to life the African American Footwear Forum. It was a snowy but magical time in DC around all the events that we helped host, and there was this vibrancy and this reunion feeling that I just can't shake, and just has sat with me since that time. And I know you feel the same. And so I want to just bring that to our minds as we think about our next conversation with our next guest. But also, we're in this moment, right? This national moment where the top issue at the FDRA board meeting was diversity inclusion. And as an organization, our mandate is to vigorously and very effectively look for ways to drive opportunities for people of color and folks who haven't had opportunity before to come into footwear ranks and to really help provide leadership and guidance and just sensitivity and all the things that are really important to meeting the needs of a diverse consumer base. And so I think our conversation will really dive into that next. But I don't want to speak for you, Jasmine, but again, going back to last year, that was one of our proudest moments, I think, in 2019.
For sure. We were able to keep up that energy by having our second African American Footwear Forum in Portland last August. And our guest today was also a phenomenal speaker at that event. And we have Darla DeGrace with us, founder of the DeGrace Group, which is a diversity and inclusion consultant agency. Darla, thank you so much for being on with us today. I had the pleasure of meeting you in person last year, but it is nice to chat with you again, even virtually.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for having me.
Yes. So let's just jump right in. Usually we get people's shoe story, right? I know that you probably engage with more than just the footwear industry, but how did you land at Reebok, and why footwear? Why a footwear brand like Reebok? I know you were a part of the talent acquisition team there recently, but how did you end up in the footwear industry?
Absolutely. So, I was always a fan of Reebok. I mean, I'm an 80s baby. So if you weren't wearing Reeboks, 80s and 90s here in the Boston area, you weren't hot, right? And so I think for me, I've always been a fan through high school. In fact, I was pulling out some recent photos of me with the bamboo earrings and the classics from my high school days. So have been a fan. I've spent my career in talent. And when the opportunity presented itself to combine my passion and expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion, Reebok reached out to me to pursue a role on the talent acquisition team. And so my love of Reebok combined with my passion for diversity, it seemed like an ideal fit to help them lead on their diversity recruitment initiatives.
Awesome. When did you launch your consultant agency?
Yeah, I launched it 2 years prior, but it was sort of a side hustle for me, right? Like I never intended to be an entrepreneur. It's now 3 years in the making. And I was continuing to do that while also working for Reebok full time.
And what sparked you to go that route? Why not just, go from company to company? What sparked the idea of going into a consultant space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get exhausted and tired with the work. For me, it was important to take a step back and say, how can I make a greater impact across industry? And so for me, I think I was able to accomplish everything that I set out to do in my tenure at Reebok, which was really about building a diverse talent pool. But I took it a step further to really focus on the culture, launching their first people of color group with some of my teammates, but also establishing pipeline and partnerships with HBCUs like Howard University. So I think I did what I could do during my tenure, but it was time for me to move on so that I could make a greater impact.
Yeah, awesome. I mentioned that you were at our African American Footwear Forum last year, being that you were in the industry for a while, and I'm pretty sure engaged with a lot of different people and attended a lot of different events. How was that event for you? How was it speaking and engaging with the people at the forum now that you're in this consultant space as well?
Yeah. So actually, I was the only one in DC. So, and that was important for me to be there. And I really advocated for myself and even other team members at Reebok to attend DC. But I was the only one that was afforded that opportunity. So I'm grateful for that. And that's where I met a majority of the team. And then was invited to Portland to serve on a panel, which was a phenomenal experience for me because it was seeing so many people that looked like me in the same industry, and you typically don't get that. And I actually met people from Boston, from some of the other brands, and it took me to go all the way to Portland to do that. And so I'm very grateful for that experience and the relationships that have come of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I hear that a lot from the feedback of people just saying like, hey, we were right down the street from each other, but we weren't connected. So it's awesome to hear you say that as well. As far as like the work you do, what is like, do you think there's like a big misconception about what you do and what you can offer? Do you find yourself having to redirect brands or companies when they come to you? Is there anything that like stands out as like a constant?
Yeah, I mean, this is not affirmative action, right? And I think that's the challenge with, some of these brands making statements around, commitment to diversify. For me, it goes beyond representation, and it's about creating an inclusive culture and a sense of belonging, where you see people of color and other marginalized communities in more of a leadership role and capacity. So, I mean, that's a critical piece. I think the miss for me is certainly about, the representation and not seeing it and thinking that you can just fill seats with people of color, and that's going to solve the problem. Really focusing on culture is where we need to be, and then accountability, across the organization.
Yeah. How do you think that employees could do a better job on their end? I think in order to move the industry to a more diverse and inclusive industry, that it's going to take the work of everybody. How do you think it's best for companies that are already at these brands or recently entering these brands and organizations to hold their companies accountable?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful not to require marginalized communities to solve for this. We didn't create this problem. So I think, working together, but it really does start with leadership. And if you have the commitment from leadership, great. If you don't, that and there lies the challenge. So assuming you have leadership's commitment, you should be able to follow up what accountability looks like. And I love employee resource groups and the business resource groups, whatever you want to call them. But oftentimes they're not set up for success, right? It's potluck and a social gathering. A true employee resource group is aligned with the strategic priorities of leadership. And that accountability piece, those goals, those KPIs are embedded in a charter to hold not only the members of those groups, but also leadership accountable. So as employees, I would hope that, particularly employees of color and other marginalized groups are involved in those resource groups and moving the work forward and helping to shape the culture. And that requires allies, that requires leaders to move that work forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, with the recent death of George Floyd, that really kind of grabbed the attention of the world, and kind of everybody had like this responsibility to finally kind of like speak out or show public support. And, there's a conversation around like how genuine brands are really being with their support or their initiatives. Do you think that conversation is even worth entertaining, like the genuineness behind it? Or do you think it's just like, it doesn't matter, just kind of do it? Like, what are your thoughts around people who kind of focus on that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally people would understand the value of diversity and inclusion. They would understand how it impacts the bottom line. But quite frankly, I could care less whether or not someone believes it. I need you to act on whatever verbiage was included in your statement following George Floyd. So if you are committing to, diversifying your talent pool, if you're committing to, increasing representation across leadership levels, how are you going to go about doing that? And how are you going to hold your teams accountable? So I'm more about action. I don't want to see any more statements. I don't want to see any more Black Lives Matter. I want to see what you're doing about it. And so I could care less, really, if leaders don't get it or other people don't get it. For me, it's about, making an impact.
Right. Yeah. How do you see the future? Like going into 2021, do you think what will emerge from all this? Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you see more small businesses and actually people coming together and creating their own? Like, do you have any thoughts on what it looks like post-COVID and after, just like kind of like this worldwide awakening?
I would say, people are tired. Black women are tired. We are leading the space and launching businesses. Black people, are spending over $1 trillion in terms of spend. So I think these brands need to really wake up and see how this is impacting bottom line. I would say that, entrepreneurs are going to be on the rise across all, races, ethnicities. But I think it's also holding these brands accountable. And I can't emphasize that enough. We as people of color, marginalized communities, we cannot let our foot off the gas. Like we need to, hold them accountable for each and every statement that they make, but also champion the work, be part of the solution. Like no one wants people around, just complaining, be part of the solution, holding ourselves accountable. I was talking recently with a few folks in this industry, and, we as people of color also need to hold ourselves accountable. We're not mentoring enough. We're not guiding enough. We're not, providing those opportunities for people to come in. We're not doing diversity succession planning in a way that we should. So we have our own things that we need to work on. But more importantly, leadership needs to really put a stake in the ground, put some resources behind it. Some companies are holding, their employees accountable through withholding any budgets and, a financial piece. So I think that's important to consider as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. If there's a brand out there, right, that is nervous because, they can no longer hide behind the veil anymore, everything is kind of exposed and people are demanding that change be made. What would you tell them as like a first actionable item? Like, what would you tell the top of leadership to do first?
Show some humility. Right. Some transparency. The fact that we have to get together to figure out what people of color in this industry, what Black and brown people, we have to do a grassroots approach to that. Show us the data. This should be public information. You should be able to go to the website and see the inequities, right? Show that humility. We know that the majority of people of color are in retail or in entry level roles or in internships. They're not in mid-level and senior level, but show us the data. And then show us how you plan to fix that or address that. And I think that is the piece. It's not a secret, but it's creating more work for Black and brown people to figure out who's in this space. How do we get together, for a unified message, again, to hold the brands accountable. So show us the information. It really should not be a secret at this point. They've made public statements. Now it's time to act.
Absolutely.
Darla, one of the things as I was listening to you and Jasmine have this conversation, humility was in my mind even before you said the word, because I feel like in a moment like this, if I was the head of a major organization, I wanted to bring change, and I was, in my example, a white male. The only way I can approach it is with a humility, because I don't have all the answers, and I don't necessarily understand the experience of those who've been marginalized and have faced systematic racism and all those things. And so that when you said that, it really resonated with me, because my hope is that as leaders come to the table, and we've had a number of our CEOs after having conversations on our board and elsewhere, I've seen emails where just like laying it out, like, I don't have all the answers. Please guide me and help me understand a better way to create a more conducive culture. And so I guess if you were to be asked that question, what would your answer be? And the other thing I really want to gravitate towards, and something that I think a lot of people do, is place a burden on people of color who are in positions that have influence to be the elixir, right? To have all the answers when they might rather be the person that's known for their legal skills, if they're general counsel, or known for their marketing or design and development skills. They don't want to be kind of the token expert on how to diversify, to your point on as to that this wasn't a problem that you all created. So if you were to kind of advise a company who's starting out, like, these are the 3 things you should do in a practical way, what are those 3 things? And then how do you ensure that there's a variety of voices that don't feel that pressure that they have to be the answer if they fit a certain profile?
Yeah, I think first, stop asking Black and brown people in other marginalized communities, what can you do?
Right.
We are so tired of that. And so do the work, right? Start to do some research. I mean, you can Google anti-racism, white supremacist work culture. You can view all of that, right? Mm-hmm. And to your point about asking the only Black and brown people within the organization to offer up an opinion and speak for all Black and brown people, I think that's unfair, right? Totally. You should have a head of diversity whose responsibility is just that, to develop and execute a strategy across the organization. That is their skill set. That is their expertise. I mean, we invest in every other resource, right? We have a head of marketing. We have a head of operations. We have a head of HR. If this is equally important, if not even more so, why wouldn't we invest in those teams? So it's not one person. If it's a global company and you don't have a C-suite executive whose role is diversity, equity, and inclusion, there lies the issue too, because it's not a priority. It's not a director. It's not someone that's sitting in Europe that can determine what diversity issues arise in the U.S.
Good point. Good point.
It's just very different. And I think that they need to invest in the work, and then appropriately resource these employee resource groups. Bring in consultants when you don't have the answers. And again, that humility, that transparency, sharing the data. And it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know, but I am going to bring in some experts. I am going to invest in this team to do the work. And it's not going to happen overnight. This is a journey. We're not all going to get to being an inclusive culture by 2021, but it's a start. And we want constant feedback on where these brands are and where companies are in their journey.
Yeah. And one of the things, just looking at your background, in 2017, you were appointed by Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker as a commissioner on both the Black Advisory and the Plymouth 400 commissions. And as an organization that's based in DC and around the policy arena constantly, are there things that, as a trade association, where we are uniquely positioned to help do things on the policy side? And what are some of those things? And then what are some things that, government policy is just not going to cut it? It's got to be led by the private sector. It's got to be led by corporate America. And maybe where are some of those places that those two things might intersect?
Yeah, I'm just thinking where I see real synergies is around supplier diversity, right? I mean, that's something that is mandated in the government sector if you're receiving federal funds, right? And that is something that could be incorporated in brands. I don't see that enough. People think diversity, it's just about people, but supplier diversity and making sure that you're investing in diverse companies and vendors. That is something that I see we could do a better job of. When you're hiring, procurement people, if you're hiring for purchasing, making sure that individual has an expertise around diversifying their suppliers and vendors, but more importantly, establishing the goals to do that, right? And making sure that that's part of their performance plan. When you think about diversity, right, again, it's not just one person's responsibility or that team, it's the entire company. So how do you weave in diversity as part of a requirement for everyone's role? Right? That's procurement, supplier diversity, that's talent acquisition, that's sourcing and pipeline, that's, recruiters and hiring managers leading and managing diverse teams, right? It really runs across the business. And I think when we can hold everyone in the organization accountable for diversity, that's when we'll see the needle move.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also a responsibility, I think, on a personal level, just as an anecdotal story, totally. But my father was in the Marine Corps, and we moved from a small town in North Carolina to the DC area. And I went to school, and this was in the early 90s, I knew 3 Afghan kids from Afghanistan, and I was just totally enveloped in a much more diverse culture that is the Washington, D.C. metro area. And it just enhanced my life tremendously. And I just think if I'm in a company that relies on ability to meet a diverse consumer group, and I'm not having representation of those consumers at all levels of the organization, then I'm not doing the company a service. I'm not doing my consumers a service. And I think, I think moving forward, having an ability to invest in talent development and to expose the industry as a whole, all the opportunities in the industry as a whole, to a more diverse group of talent at the base level, at high school, middle school, high school, junior college, community college, full university, HBCUs and the like. I think that for us is the key. Like, how do we just get as much churning in that area so that, a decade from now, we look back and we said, this was the time when we made the right investments to ensure that we were able to accomplish the diversity goals that we set forward. And I think that's what it comes down to. And we need to do a better job of clearly trying to figure that out way sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, even look at, gender parity, right? So in Germany, like they're requiring a 50% split on gender, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're not focusing on intersectionality, right? And so while everyone can applaud, you have a good gender mix at the leadership level or the board level, I'm not applauding that. Because I don't see any women of color, right? And so the priority to focus on gender without infusing intersectionality is a problem with many of these brands. And we're not applauding white women in leadership anymore.
Right.
It really needs to, they need to diversify and
Sure.
focus on that intersectionality piece.
Yeah, no, I know. And I appreciate the viewpoint that you bring. And in all honesty, it's having these things simmer under the surface and not bringing them out in the open and bringing that accountability and that sunlight onto it that's super frustrating, I think, for all of us. So the fact that we're having these conversations and we're taking a look inside, and part of that humility is knowing that change has to happen, and not most companies don't have it even close to being right, but with sunlight and discussion and collaboration and investment, then you can get to a place that's better off in the future than it is right now. And so that's my hope, that we all can take that to heart and start to do our part to work toward in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it really does start with the history and making sure people understand their history. I've been inundated with requests to facilitate different workshops around anti-racism or toxic work cultures or cultural competence. And my response to each and every one of them is, if you're not ready to have the conversation around slavery or Native American genocide, then you're not ready to talk about unconscious bias or microaggressions, because you need to understand where we've been and to even figure out why you think that way, right? And why you have these prejudices and why you have these biases, and then what you're going to do about it in terms of changing your behaviors and actions. And then also looking at policies, right? HR needs to do some self-reflection there on policies and procedures. So there's a lot that can be done in this space, and I think we have a real opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Darla, thank you so much for joining us today. I love just how open you are and direct and straight to the point, because that kind of tone is needed. And that stood out to me when you were a panelist or did the one-on-one interview at AAFF last year. So I really appreciate that. I'm excited to see the work that you continue to do throughout this time, especially with people and organizations waking up and knowing that they need someone like you in their companies and advising them on how to overcome these challenges and make a real change. So thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, I do want to do a fun little segment, which is what you got, what you getting. We talk about the shoes that we have on our feet now and what we're thinking about purchasing. I will start it off so you have some kind of idea of how this goes. Right now, I have a pair of Tevas on. I've been wearing them to death. So I'm thinking that I'm going to get a second pair because they're great. I've been doing a lot of walking. My feet feel great in them. I also get some air. They're not stuffy in a pair of sneakers. But I'm thinking about just getting some different colors. So I really have been enjoying those. So that's what I'm getting next as well. Matt, what about you? What do you have on your feet and what are you thinking about getting?
It's funny you bring this up, Jasmine. We are like-minded people because you have Teva, which is a Deckers brand. I have been wearing to death my Hoka One is how you pronounce it, not Hoka 1-1, but Hoka One's flip-flops or Zoris, and they're just like a Hoka shoe, have a massive outsole that's super elevated, so it's almost like I'm wearing a platform flip-flop, which for a guy who's 6'4" looks kind of strange, but they're super comfortable, and because I work from home, I can wear them constantly. What I have my eye on now is actually a pair of Sperry. Sperry is coming out with more and more kind of recycled materials that go into shoes that are perfect for summer, perfect for being at the beach, on the boat, of course, all safely, socially distanced. And so that's my plan, is to pick up some Sperry's.
Awesome. What about you, Darla? What you got and what you getting?
Well, since I'm working from home, I am in my black dog gray furry slippers, wishing I was in Martha's Vineyard right now. But what I'm getting, I've traded in my red bottoms. I used to wear heels nonstop before working in the sneaker industry, and now I can't even stand in them for more than an hour. I've got my eye on these Louis Vuitton denim kicks. And so I love that, the high end, companies are looking at, really getting into this market.
Those sound cool.
They're pretty dope. Yeah, they're pretty dope.
Yeah. There's a lot of great high end sneakers right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Darla. Matt, you want to kind of close this out?
I will close it out, Darla. This was an eye-opening conversation. I'm super grateful for it and thankful that you're willing to come on and collaborate with us and help us think critically about these issues. And so thank you so much. Shoe and listeners globally, we are glad that you've joined us for another edition of Shoe and Show, where we talk about all the ins and outs of the footwear industry. We tackle fun issues and goofy issues, but we also take on really important issues like diversity, inclusion, and all that's going on in our society right now. And so to access our full catalog of episodes, go to shoeandshow.com. You can also rate us wherever you download the podcast. We only accept 5-star ratings. If it's below that, it automatically gets kicked out. I think it's some kind of algorithm. But be that as it may, we're glad that you've joined us today. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.